extensively. Darda was very interesting because he was known in the literature in that area as Dardanus or Darda. But Darda when he formed the city of Troy, he was governing the tribe of Lud. And the tribe of Lud are known as the Lydian people. They were the sons of Shem. The sons of Shem. Well, after the Athenian War, the Trojan War between Athens and Troy, right? Two brothers fighting each other. The whole of the house of Lud packed it up and moved to Britain. And they formed New Troy on the Thames River on a hill that they named after the tribe of Lud. It was called Lud Hill. Lud Hill. And it was known as Ludonium, which would later become London, and it was built on Lud Hill. Now, Lud Hill in London is the hill where St. Paul's Cathedral is. This is the place where Paul reportedly preached in London, and they built a cathedral there called St. Paul's Cathedral, and it sits on Lud Hill, the original town site of London. That's where London was originally formed, and it was formed as New Troy. So the House of Darda would end up on the western shores of the English Isles. That's where they would go, the Luds under the House of Darda. The House of Calcol would continue to reign in Athens until one of the grandsons, whose name was Gyalaethus, packed it up and said, hey, let's go back to Egypt. And he took over 1 million people with him. And they went back into Mitzrayim. They went back into the Nile River Valley, which was by the way, the source of all their intelligence, all their writings, that all came out of Egypt. They get down there and they say, look, there's nothing going on here. This place is dead broke. Let's get out of here. And so they kept migrating, and they migrated across the northern steppes of Africa and eventually migrated into what was known as Celtiberia, or Iberia, the Iberian, which was named after Eber, the progenitor of Abraham.
Wow.
Okay, so it was called Iberia because they were the tribe of Hebrews that were living in Iberia. Well, right. the western shores of this peninsula were known as Lusitania, and they were essentially unpopulated. It's pretty unpopulated even right now, but it was essentially unpopulated. And so Gyalaethus took the whole of the tribe into this area, and they formed a city there called the Port of Gyalaethus, now known as Portugal.
Right.
This tribe of Gyalaethus would then become known as Gauls, or Gaelic people. And they would populate all of Portugal, and they would populate the northern part of Spain, now known as Basques. They would populate the western coast of France, then known as Gaul or Galatia, also sometimes known as Galil. And then they would cross over into Britain, and they would populate Cornwall, they would populate Wales, they would populate the Isle of Ireland, and ultimately into Scotland. Now, the first king now this all happened around 1100 BC.
Right.
But the first Gaelic king would not happen until 581. And this would be Eochaid the Herriman, because Ireland was ruled by Danites, the tribe of Dan.
Right.
As was Scotland, as was Denmark, as was Norway. They were ruled by the tribe of Dan. And in Ireland, they were known as the Tuatha De Danann, the tribe of Dan, the Tuatha De Danann. And the Tuatha De Danann were actually Baali worshippers. They worshiped the cult of the serpent. Well, all of this would change when Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC. One of those left behind in Jerusalem, two of those left behind, was Jeremiah and Baruch, Yirmiyahu and Baruch. And the daughters of Zedekiah, the three daughters of Zedekiah, were left behind. Zedekiah fled the city and left his wife and daughters behind.
Wow. Now, is this the prophet or is this the king?
The prophet. Zedekiah the king. The king. Zedekiah the king, the last king of Jerusalem.
The last king. Okay.
Yeah, the Babylonians would capture him and his 7 sons on the way to Jericho, and they captured him, slaughtered all 7 of his sons before him, and then poked his eyes out and took him back to Babylon.
Right.
And the daughters, however, fled with Jeremiah and Baruch to Egypt.
Wow.
Now, the story goes, and you get kind of mixed stories on this, but the story goes that Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant, Jacob's pillow, and David's harp with him. These were the three artifacts he took with him into Egypt. And Baruch was with him. Now, when they got to Egypt, two of the daughters elected to stay in Egypt. But the one daughter, Tia Tefi, well, depends. Some people say two daughters came with him. Some people say one. But they left, and the glyph that's on the tomb of Jeremiah in Ireland shows them leaving Egypt and traveling to Gibraltar, changing ships, and coming up into Ireland, where they ported in Ireland, and they came in to present themselves. And Tia Tefi, which means the tender twig, whose real name was, guess what? Tamar. She would marry Yochai the Herman, who was the first Gaelic king to rule over Ireland, and she brought with her the Torah. And so, because she's got Jeremiah with her and Baruch with her, and they brought with them the Torah and Torah observance. She was in the direct line of kings from David, right?
Right.
And so the house of Peretz would marry into the house of Zerach for the first time with the wedding of Tia Tefi and Yochai the Herman, 581 BC, and they would create the new Jerusalem in Ireland called Tara.
Wow. So is that like Tara or
T-A-R-A, Tara.
Tara. Okay.
That's what they named their capital. And that's another artifact you can visit while you're in Ireland. You can go to Tara Hill and see the place where it was built. And all of a sudden things changed. The serpent worship went completely out of Ireland entirely as soon as Jeremiah put the Ark of the Covenant down on the ground. The serpent worship left all of Ireland. And they became representatives of the Torah. So here you see the house of Judah now in the hands of Zerach, in the high kings of Ireland, which would become the high kings of Scotland. And it would be their children who would become the high kings of Wales. Now, the high kings of Wales were something else, because the tribe that would then move into Wales and Cornwall was actually the house of Joseph, not the house of Ephraim and not the house of Manasseh, right? Those are two distinct tribes that, if you recall, in Genesis 48, Yasharel adopts them as his children.
Right.
These are mine. They become two distinct tribes. They get land grants in the Holy Land and everything else. The house of Joseph did not. Joseph, according to the book of Jasher, had more sons in Egypt with Asenath, and they did not get a land grant, but they sojourned with Moshe in the Exodus. And they ended up being part of the northern kingdom. But as part of the northern kingdom, they never came into the Ivrit language. They held on to the ancient Egyptian language, this tribe of Yosef.
So wait a minute. Now, Joseph and Asenath, are you saying they were still alive at the time of Moshe?
No, they had died, but they had children. They had other children besides Ephraim.
Okay, their other children. Okay.
Yeah, and their other children left with the Exodus.
Okay.
But they were part of the Northern Kingdom breakaway. And so because of this, the Northern Kingdom has an interesting history. Most people don't know it, but in the Northern Kingdom, they were essentially anarchists. I mean, they were a very productive class of people. They were practicing capitalism. They were the builders. They were the ones that kept getting hit with the high taxes. They were the ones who built Solomon's temple. On and on and on. They were doing all the shipping, all the trading, all the work. That was Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, Dan, Ephraim. They were doing all of this, right? And so when they break away from the Southern Kingdom, there's nothing going on. They put up a temple with two bulls. It's like, that should cut it. Well, it wasn't cutting it. And so finally, when you get, I think it's 4 kings down the road, you come to this king Umri. Mm-hmm. And Umri, it's called the dynasty of Umri. He establishes, for the first time, codified law in the Northern Kingdom. He codifies the law. And when he codifies the law, the house of Yosef in particular became adherents of the laws of Umri. So when they were taken captive by the Assyrians in 722 BC, they were called like Umri, which in Hebrew is Kumri. So the Welsh to this day call themselves Cymru, and they call their language Cymraeg. And Ross Bradstock and Alan Wilson demonstrated that the Welsh language is how you translate Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Wow.
They proved it.
And he's got a book on that on your site, right? The
Yeah,
Cepher's
Cymru. Yeah.
yeah.
And it spells it out. And Alan Wilson also developed in Moses and the Hieroglyphs. He completely deciphered the black obelisk using a Welsh application to the Egyptian hieroglyphs, which you could do. You can, if you look at the hieroglyph that is the cartouche of Alexander the Great, or the cartouche of Cleopatra, well, then you've got a pretty good idea what's there. And they were able to prove it. And then he was able to completely decipher the black obelisk. And it was amazing what was being, the story of Joseph is on the black obelisk. The story of Moshe is on the black obelisk. It's all there, right? Which you've got no other record anywhere else in the hieroglyphs. But Alan Wilson demonstrated the story of Yosef and the story of Moshe do exist in the Egyptian hieroglyphic record, and they exist on the black obelisk, right? Incredible stuff. So anyway, so you see now that this Welsh faction, this House of Cymru, is occupying Cornwall and Wales. And from them would come a king from the High Irish kings. And that king would eventually marry, one of their kings would eventually marry the other daughter of Joseph, Arimathea. Because Miriam had a sister whose name was Anna. And she married the High King. And that High King had a son whose name was Caractacus, who was known as Caradoc, who was taken exile by Nero into Rome, him and his whole family. And that whole family is the family that is identified by Paul in the book of Romans. Greet this person, greet that person, greet this person. That's all the family of Caradoc in Rome, the children of this King of Wales, who had married the daughter Anna, and whose great-grandson was none other than Luke, the writer of the Gospel of Luke, who would become anointed by Paul to be the first bishop of Rome. He was also in the direct line of David through this group of kings that were running what we now call Wales. So this whole thing now, so when we talk about the true tribe of Judah and the scepter in the hand and the lawgiver between his feet is really the Gaelic people.
Wow.
And by the way, part of those descendants of the Gaelic people include the French Huguenots that were persecuted in La Rochelle. It include the Basque people that are being persecuted in northern Spain. If you go to Ireland, you'll find nothing but a history of persecution. Nothing but. And it still is the persecution is still going on in Ireland. It hasn't stopped. It's still going on. People think they can just run all over the Irish. And they do. They just trample them, right? And even in Portugal, you see Gaelic people, you see the Gauls, right? The so-called Gauls. And so this is really the true Yehuda that holds the birthright of the scepter in his hand and the lawgiver between his feet.